Welcome back to Movie Digest. Today I'm featuring a 2011 biographical comedy drama called The Untouchables. Warning, spoilers ahead, so proceed with caution. One late night in Paris, we find Driss driving Philippe around the city. As the monotonous traffic sets in, Driss decides to break the speed limit, weaving between cars and disregarding traffic signs. This reckless driving soon attracts the police, and Driss wagers €100 that he can shake them off. However, after speeding under a bridge, the cops block him by ambushing the car from both sides. Unperturbed, Driss UPS his bet to €200, confident he can get them to escort him. When the officers order him out, he puts on an act, claiming Philippe is immobile and urgently needs hospital care. The police verify his story when they find a wheelchair and witness Philippe's staged convulsions. Considering it an emergency, the cops overlook the speeding and even offer to escort them. To celebrate winning the bet, Driss plays September by Earth, Wind and Fire, and when they arrive at their destination, he shares a smoke with Philippe as soon as the cops are gone. Their friendship began months earlier. Philippe and his assistant Magali were interviewing candidates for a new caregiver, but none of the applicants managed to impress. They all gave standard or awkward responses. That is, until Driss burst in unannounced. He wasn't there for an interview at all but just to get a form signed confirming he wouldn't be hired, so he could collect unemployment benefits. With his blunt demeanor and a bit of flirting directed at Magali, he amused Philippe enough to invite him back the next day for his paperwork. Driss then returns to his modest neighborhood where he struggles to take a bath as his younger siblings create chaos. Only his older, more responsible sister Mina manages to help him finish in time. While waiting for their mother, he watches through the window as his brother Adama steps out of a suspicious car. When Adama finally enters the apartment, he only says he'd been at school and leaves quickly with his bag, which only deepens Driss's suspicions. That evening, when their mom arrives, Driss presents her with a stolen Faberge egg and pretends he'd been away on vacation. His mother, however, is far from pleased, especially after 6 months of his unexplained absence and lack of communication, and she kicks him out. Tired of his lies and feeling overwhelmed by her other responsibilities, Driss spends the night out with some neighborhood friends, enjoying snacks and a smoke. The next day, he goes back to Philippe's house to retrieve his papers. There, the housekeeper Yvonne gives him a tour, explaining Philippe's daily routine and showing him the room, and even a private bathroom, that he'd have to himself. Driss can't help but admire the bathtub before he's quickly taken to meet Philippe, who not only hands him the signed sheet but also offers him a job opportunity. Driss accepts a 1-month trial, with Philippe wagering that he won't even last 2 weeks. After settling in, Driss learns the basics of caring for Philippe. He must learn to stimulate Philippe's legs, transfer him into his wheelchair, help him shower, and change his clothes. Things become awkward when he finds out he's also expected to help Philippe dress in high stockings and even clean him up after bathroom use. Despite his protests, Driss eventually accepts these tasks as part of his job. Later that evening, while Driss enjoys a snack on the roof, he's interrupted by Philippe's daughter Elisa and her boyfriend Bastien, who are looking for a private spot. Driss promptly ejects the pair, refusing to share his beer. Before long, Driss adapts to the routine with Philippe, though he does make a few early mistakes, like handing the phone to Philippe instead of setting it to his ear or forgetting the baby monitor during a bath. He even learns to sort through Philippe's mail, opening most letters except for a set of private ones. When he finds a flyer for female escorts, instead of tossing it out as Philippe had instructed, he starts a special file for them. Even with all the work, Driss makes sure to have some fun. He keeps trying, and failing, to charm Magali and occasionally calls escorts for a bit of excitement. One morning, Yvonne finds some dangerous weapons in his bag when she comes to scold him for being late, but she chooses not to comment immediately. On a day when Driss is driving Philippe, he refuses to put him in the back of a van like cargo. Instead, he opts for one of the seldom-used luxury cars. At first, Philippe questions the choice, favoring practicality, but soon he's thrilled by the prospect of a faster, more exciting ride, even if Yvonne disapproves. When a neighbor's car blocks the building's entrance despite clear signage, Driss doesn't hesitate. He confronts the neighbor by grabbing him by the shirt and threatening until the car is moved. Philippe is impressed by his boldness, though Yvonne remains critical. Their next outing takes them to a museum, where Philippe plans to buy a piece of art that Driss dismisses as nothing more than a red blotch on a canvas. Later, a relative meets Philippe and expresses concern over Driss's violent tendencies and mentions his criminal record. Philippe, however, remains unfazed, valuing Driss's candid attitude and sense of humor. after yet another unsuccessful flirtation attempt with Magali, Driss dines with Yvonne in the kitchen while listening to Philippe dictate a letter to Magali. Yvonne, insisting it's a private matter, turns off the baby monitor and explains that Philippe has been corresponding with a woman named Eleanor, letters that Driss wasn't permitted to read. Despite their ongoing exchange, Philippe has never met Eleanor, their connection exists only through words. That night, Driss even teases Yvonne about the admiring glances she receives from the gardener before heading off to bed. Later that night, disturbed by strange noises coming through the baby monitor, Driss discovers that Philippe is having trouble breathing. Unable to ignore his distress, he gently guides Philippe through the episode with soothing words and a cool, damp cloth on his face. Philippe finally drifts off, only to wake moments later, demanding fresh air. This time, Driss quickly transfers him into his wheelchair, wraps him in blankets, and takes him for a walk along the river. For the first time in a long while, Philippe enjoys the nighttime view of Paris, explaining that while medication helps, he sometimes suffers from phantom pain. Observing some passing girls, he confesses that although his condition prevents him from fully pleasing a woman, he still finds pleasure in having his ears massaged. When the phantom pain threatens again, Driss shares one of his joints with him. Philippe is hesitant at first, but soon he grows to appreciate it. Afterward, the pair head to a restaurant where, amid jokes and shared laughter, Philippe opens up about his past. He recalls meeting his wife during their student days, their marriage, her 5 miscarriages, and her terminal illness, which led to the adoption of Elisa. Philippe's passion for competition, extreme sports, and speed once found an outlet in paragliding, yet during one such flight, bad weather led to a crash that broke his vertebrae. Despite his wheelchair, he insists that his true handicap is living without his wife. Amid their banter, Philippe realizes that Driss has passed his 1-month trial, making him an official member of his life, but not before insisting that Driss return the stolen Faberge egg, a yearly gift from his wife that now totals 25, symbolizing their time together. The next day, Driss visits his sister Mina as she leaves school. Though Mina is a bit annoyed that he's only reached out to ask about the egg, she also mentions that the police have been calling their home. Later, he meets with Adama, who reluctantly admits he was caught with 30 grams of something. Driss offers to take him to lunch, but Adama refuses and instead reappears in that same dubious car. Soon after, Driss is allowed to be present while Philippe dictates another letter to Eleanor, this time for Magali. He finds Philippe's flowery language tiresome and wishes he'd be more direct. He's also surprised that, after 6 months of correspondence, they haven't exchanged any pictures. When Driss spots Eleanor's phone number on one of the letters, he takes it as a sign and calls her, prompting Philippe to finally engage with her beyond just written words. Their conversation goes so well that Philippe begins chatting with her frequently, even just before an opera performance during which Driss can't help but laugh at the extravagant costumes. The following day, Driss convinces Philippe to exchange photos with Eleanor, choosing one that shows Philippe in his wheelchair. Later, while Driss is painting, Elisa bursts into his room to ask for cigarettes and mocks his attempt at artistry. Frustrated, he shoos her away before joining Philippe, who is busy instructing Yvonne to swap the chosen picture for one of Philippe before his injury. Yvonne discreetly hides the original photo in the escort file just as Driss arrives, complaining about Elisa and urging Philippe to discipline her, a suggestion that Yvonne endorses. Philippe is taken aback when Driss casually mentions he's been painting. As the days go by, the bond between Philippe and Driss deepens. Driss takes Philippe out to play in the snow and accompanies him on runs. Philippe even gets him his first suit and reprimands his daughter while Driss listens in through the baby monitor. When Driss completes his first painting, he shows it to Magali, only to be slapped when he tries to kiss her. Nevertheless, Philippe loves the painting and promises to try selling it. Together, they enjoy life's pleasures, from speeding in faster cars and sharing joints to even hiring escorts together. On Philippe's birthday, he isn't particularly enthusiastic. Every year he feigns surprise at the party and reluctantly meets relatives who only visit to check he's still around. Philippe predicts the celebration will be dull. As live classical music fills the room, Driss searches for Elisa, who is in tears after overdosing on some of Yvonne's pills she thought would be fatal. Upset because Bastien had broken up with her and insulted her, she asks Driss to confront him, a task he accepts for a fee. Meanwhile, Philippe manages to sell his painting for 11,000 euros after showcasing it to a relative, and Driss chats with Yvonne in the dining room. She reveals that Magali is in a rocky relationship with someone named Fred, giving Driss a glimmer of hope. As the party winds down, Philippe makes Driss listen to some of the most significant classical tracks, though Driss can only joke in response. Once the band finishes, Philippe switches to his iPod, playing Boogie Wonderland by Earth, Wind and Fire, and soon finds himself dancing energetically in the middle of the floor, so much so that he convinces the rest of the guests to join in, much to his own delight. Later that night, while tucking Philippe into bed, Driss opens the latest letter from Eleanor. In it, she sends a photo of herself, revealing her attractiveness, and suggests they meet the following week when she's in Paris. On the day of their date, Yvonne and Driss help Philippe try on numerous outfits until they settle on the perfect one. Meanwhile, taking a day off, Driss visits Bastien and pressures him into apologizing to Elisa, demanding that he bring her croissants daily and even fix his hair. Afterwards, Driss pays a brief visit to his mother's workplace, simply to watch her from afar. At the restaurant, Yvonne and Philippe wait for Eleanor, who ends up being extremely late. After an hour of waiting, Philippe calls Driss to pick him up and leaves the restaurant, not noticing that Eleanor has just arrived. Later that same night, Philippe takes Driss aboard his private plane and rewards him with the money from the painting sale, a gesture that fills Driss with joy. The next morning in the countryside, Philippe decides to go paragliding and insists on taking a reluctant Driss along. Although Driss is initially terrified, he eventually finds himself enjoying the experience. When they return home, Adama is waiting for Driss and receives a scolding upon seeing the scars on his face. Adama, however, still refuses to share details about his situation, so Driss has him stay in his room while he calls Mina to reassure her, and then prepares Philippe for bed. Philippe, however, remains awake. After sharing a painting with Driss, he inquires about Driss's family. At first, Driss is reluctant, but eventually he reveals that Adama isn't his biological brother at all. His real parents are actually his aunt and uncle, who brought him from Senegal when he was 8 because they couldn't have children of their own. His true name is Bakary Bahari, but since other kids already had that name, they began calling him Idris, which eventually became Driss. Later, after his aunt miraculously conceived and following his uncle's passing, more men and children entered his life. In a manner similar to his earlier discussions about Elisa, Philippe points out that Adama needs proper discipline, and consequently he dismisses Driss so that he can spend more time with his family. After all, one cannot devote an entire life to caring for an elderly man. The next morning, after Bastien delivers his daily croissant sporting a neater hairstyle, Driss packs his bags and gets ready to leave. Magali stops by to say goodbye, and when Driss makes one last attempt at flirting, she introduces him to her partner Fred, short for Frederick, making it clear that she isn't interested in men, causing Driss to give up immediately. On his way out, he returns the baby monitor to Yvonne and teases her about misleading him regarding Magali, prompting her to hand him the escort file he had started. Disappointed to discover that his chosen picture was hidden inside, Driss discards the file but keeps the photo for himself. Outside, when he encounters a car blocking the entrance once again, he insists it be moved, even though he no longer works there. When Adama chides him for it, Driss stands firm, calling it a matter of principle. A few hours later, Driss and Adama pick up their mother at the station. Meanwhile, back at the house, Philippe sits down to dinner with his new, rather stifling caretaker, whom he dismisses without even taking a bite, especially since Yvonne is out on a date with the gardener, leaving no one to reprimand him. As days pass, Driss eventually returns to his old life. He reconnects with his former friends and warns the drivers of the suspicious car to leave Adama alone. When he attends an interview for which he lacks experience, he impresses the employer by describing himself as pragmatic and leveraging the art knowledge he picked up while working for Philippe, which lands him a job as a driver. Meanwhile, Philippe continues to dislike his new caretaker and remains in a perpetual bad mood. One night, when Philippe refuses any help with his phantom pain, Yvonne calls Driss to assist, bringing them back full circle to the earlier escapade with the police chasing them and later escorting them to the hospital. After that adventure, Driss drives Philippe to the coast, where the calming sight of the sea soothes Philippe. Some time later, Driss even trims Philippe's overgrown beard before taking him to a restaurant for lunch, though he doesn't stay long, knowing that someone else will be keeping Philippe company. Driss wishes him luck and finally returns the Faberge egg, prompting Philippe to worry about being alone until he meets his date, Alain Orr, who is thrilled to see him and unfazed by his wheelchair. In the end, the real Count Philippe Pazzo di Borgo is said to live in Morocco, remarried with 2 daughters, while the real Driss, whose name is actually Abdel Yasmin Salou, now runs his own firm and is married with 3 children. Despite everything, the 2 men remain very close friends to this day. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.